Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. This is John Verdon. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Extreme. It's my great pleasure today to be able to really kick this webinar off. This webinar is a part of a series of webinars that we provide for the Dynamics Partner Channel members. I'm excited today because I get the opportunity to introduce Bonnie Robertson. Bonnie is um, a great mentor to many partners in the channel. As you've seen, as the prior PowerPoint slides have been rotating, Bonnie has been all about channel partners for over 25 years, has a really deep history going back into the GP days as an executive vice president for organizational and channel development. Bonnie was just instrumental in building channel all of her life. So we're going to have the pleasure of hearing from Bonnie today. I'm sure you'll all appreciate the information that she brings forward, and it's all about people. People is are one of our greatest assets. So during the presentation today, if you have questions, there's a couple of different ways that we can handle it. One, we'll stop at the end for a one-on-one dialogue. So we'll take time. We'll open up your call or your line as you have a question. I believe we'll be able to see your hand raised. You'll have to help me a little bit through this part of the functionality. I've never used it before, but I'm sure we'll figure it out. And this webinar is also being recorded. So if you want to go back through and review, we'll make that link available. It takes about probably 20 minutes to get that link live and available through the site, but we'll certainly send out a link to it. You can feel free to share that with others as we go. So with all of that said, if you have any questions that you need to chat with us about, certainly do use the chat box. I am going to go ahead and kick this thing off by introducing Bonnie Robertson, a good friend of everybody in the channel, and you can take it away, Bonnie.
Well, thank you, John. Can everyone hear me? I
I
assume?
certainly do.
Okay, good. Well, I'm excited to be here and to talk about one of these very important aspects of the channel, and that is the overall managing of people, and particularly being able to retain and engage employees in today's workplace. And we launched a survey and a study several years ago, redid that study again for Extreme in this past year. And so what I'm going to walk through are some of the results of that, the trends that we're seeing, and try to answer some primary questions about. And one of the things that we learned is several years ago, I was commissioned to do a study on the future growth barriers for the Dynamics channel globally. The #1 growth barrier that partners saw was their ability to attract and retain sufficient talent to meet the changing customer needs and requests. And a lot of that has to do with some of the different skills, areas, etc. And so over a course of time, I've been monitoring this research and monitoring the trends, and I'll explain the survey and where some of this data has come from. But also, in addition to the data, I'll give some context around trying to be able to answer some of these key questions. And here are really the questions that we've gone about to answer, particularly in 2013 when we did this survey most recently with several hundred responses across the globe, but we have about a 700 response database just in this information itself. But really looking at what are the indicators of engagement and motivation. In other words, what really causes people to stay engaged in our organizations. You know, unfortunately, some people will stay for a time period, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're engaged. And in fact, recent Gallup polls showed that there's a considerable amount of people who remain at work but are not actively functioning at work. And the recent Gallup poll shows that, at least in North America, they're estimating almost 70% of people that while they may be at work are not actively engaged in work, and some of those people are actively engaged in almost an underlining sabotage. So I do believe the technology sector is better than that, however. People have a tendency to love their work and are passionate about it, and that becomes very important to them. And so, but at the same time, we know that keeping people engaged and focused does help with customer service it helps to retain customers, it helps to drive revenue, so there's a financial impact. The other real question is, what are the indicators of employee at risk? So we've all been in a situation where we have spent a lot of energy and time teaching people, training people, orientating them, getting them accustomed to the customers. They may have years of experience and knowledge, and then they leave and they move on to someplace else. What part of it went to look at is what actually causes people to leave their jobs. Because it's one thing to say to people, what is important to you at work. It's another thing to actually track why they would change jobs. And so I'm going to share some information about what we found in that two-way process. And are there any factors that can impact retention? Most people make it the assumption that it's money, that the only thing that I can do to retain people in my organization is to try to outbid somebody else and to try to keep them attached to money. What we're going to find out here is that whereas, reasonable compensation in a market competitive compensation, in other words, you're at least at some point of average in the marketplace, once you get to that point, there are a variety of other factors that impact retention other than money. And we'll walk through some of those as well. Then I also want to give a couple comparisons just because it's of interest. This study had been done not only in 2013 as commissioned by Extreme CRM here, but also in 2010 and 2006. And so I'm comparing some data and we'll give you some comparisons as to some trends that we're seeing happening within a channel. Before we get into that, I'd like to ask a question. We have the poll capability here of those of you that are participants. Is the first question, and I believe, John, you're going to pop that out, how many employees are there in your organizations? And I ask this because just in general, if you could click on some of that and let us know. Because sometimes I can kind of gear the context of this into sizes of organizations. The study itself, there were people in all ranges, all 500 plus employees and 1 to 25 employees. So it looks like we have about half of you that are in organizations of 25 and under, and then the other half somewhere between 26 and 80 employees. So I appreciate that. Thank you for doing that poll. That will help me to gauge the comments here. The second poll question that I have is how many of you here are actively involved in managing people? So your choices are yes, I am, no, or occasionally. Some of you may be project managers where you're occasionally managing people but not directly. So it looks like 100% say yes, you're actively involved in managing people. That's good because then I will gear, again, some of my comments to that. So when we go to, so we can close these polls. And, okay, now I've got screen sharing, a bit of an issue here. I can share the results. We've seen the results. Now I'd like to go back to my screen. And so for whatever reason, I am having, I don't know if we change presenters, but my screen won't move forward. There we go. Okay. Thank you.
No
so
problem.
Let's take a look at some of the demographics and what actually occurred here. One is in the demographics and the trends of this is the 2013 survey, which was done last year. The responses were global at about 50% in North America and the other 50% primarily from EMEA. There were a few from Asia Pac, etc. They were Dynamics partners predominantly, at least that was one of the ways in which they obtained that, and it was, again, this was commissioned through Extreme. What was interesting here, and this was a change from the previous years, is men definitely outnumbered women. 83% of the respondents in this survey were men. And we don't jump to a lot of conclusions in that, except that when I did cross data, I will mention that there are some different reasons why women will leave the workplace than necessarily their counterparts from it. So there's a little bit of a gender difference. I don't know if we're losing talent within the channel that are women, or if this just happens to be an anomaly. We'll continue to address this. Another interesting kind of trend is that the channel workforce is aging. 77% of the current channel workforce were 35 years or older. And we've seen this previously, whereas years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, definitely a lot of this channel and its talent were young people moving through mentoring programs, through universities, etc. But we seem to have lost some of that connection. And interestingly enough, 6% were 65 or older. In 2010, when I did a similar one with about 500 respondents in that one, there was only 1% that were 65 or older. So there could have been some economic changes that have occurred in these last several years, or various reasons, but we are definitely seeing a workforce that is aging, and that creates, when you go about to set up your talent in your organization and you think about strategies to be able to ensure retention, etc., it's good to kind of keep those in mind. The other thing, retention trends remain similar, and when I say similar, about 21%, close to a quarter of all of this also occurred in 2010 and 2006. About a quarter of all of the channel is currently at risk. And when I say currently at risk, they're asked a question about their current situation in their job. I'll refer to this a little bit later. And one of the options is to simply say, I am actively looking for another job. Another one is, I'm not actively looking, but as soon as something comes better, I'm out of here. All the way through to, I really want to stay at this job as long as possible. This is what I love to do. So we're looking at about a quarter of the workforce that's currently in that avenue of either I'm actively looking or as soon as something better comes along. Then, of course, we wanted to find what better means to them, and that's what we're going to talk about here in terms of those factors. Again, I've mentioned a slight difference in age groups and gender in terms of the motivation factors and what keeps people on the job. I'll mention that as we walk through it. One of the real key things here, and while we have people that are managing people directly, this will be really important for you, is that leadership impact has increased. And I'll explain what I mean by that, but I do cross-analyze data between those people who say they want to stay at the job as long as possible, they're loving it, all the way down through to I want out of here. There is a direct impact between their relationship with their leaders and how they view their current state in the organization. And I'll talk about that, so it shows that leadership can definitely have an impact here. So as we look at, now this is all responders. I have done some, but for the sake of this particular webinar, I've taken all the responders and I've ranked them. And there were 15 different responses plus an open-ended question. And those questions were, what's most important to you at work? And people were able to rank the various factors of what's most important to them at work. And they ranged on anywhere from, you know, job security to compensation to working with others to etc. And so what I did here is pull the top 5. And I'll start with the bottom 5, or the number 5, and take you to the number 1 motivator that people said is important to them on the job. Number 5 actually had a tie in this particular study, and it was one, inspiring leadership, and the other was having up-to-date technology to work with. People do look for inspiring leadership, and when you ask them in focus groups what that means, they want people who are excited and passionate about what they're doing, companies with vision. They want to know that there is a strategy, and that strategy, in fact, is something they can connect to. It makes sense in the marketplace. And at the same time, they want up-to-date technology, which I think is interesting because we're talking about a technology-specific work group here. But part of it is they know what technology can do, and they want the best technology they can have to be able to help them monitor their work, monitor their projects, monitor their contacts, monitor their customers, talk to each other, you know, as colleagues. So that was in terms of the top list, that was the number 5 most important motivational factor at work. Number 4 was teamwork and collaboration. People see working together and having a team that, as some people would say in the focus groups, I want to know that people have my back. I want to know that if I'm out there with a customer and the customer contacts someone else, that we're not going to turn around and somebody's going to, you know, bash my work, or somebody's going to speak negatively of it. I need to know that there's somebody when I need help that I can turn to, and they will say, here, let me help you finish that up. Let me help you get that done. Politics within organizations is the exact opposite of this. And we did hear in the focus groups from people who talk about the political aspect of, around here, for example, you get things done by knowing certain people, not by knowing how to do things. And so a political environment is one that would be an anti-teamwork and collaboration, where you see sides being built up and you see a lot of different political infighting, which has a tendency to destroy teams. Most people that have taken these surveys in the work group remember having been a part of a team such as that, and then see it, of course, as very valuable. So that was number 4 in terms of what are the most important things for me in my work environment. Number 3 is having a trusting relationship with my direct manager. And so since most everyone here is a direct manager, this is one of the top 3 and is spoken about over and over again in the focus groups. Even if people are not sure always where the organization is headed, even if they question, are we headed in the right direction, is other leadership being upfront with us, if they have a trusting relationship with the person that they report to, that will give them honest feedback, that will coach them as time goes on, that becomes an extremely important factor to their willingness to stay on the job, and their willingness to work and actively be engaged in the job. The second highest motivational factor is an opportunity to learn new skills. This has increased from previous years when we were doing this study. And part of that, I believe, in visiting with people is certainly there is an understanding and an acknowledgement of the intense amount of skills that are continually changing over and over again, whether it's in the development world and how we go about developing products, whether it's in how we go about selling to customers or finding buying opportunities, that it's much more of, instead of a salesperson's approach, it's much more of a business process, knowing customers' businesses, understanding their businesses. And a lot of people are looking for the skills to do this. And so I think particularly since we've had a situation where there has been so many different skills changes, they see this as a way for them to be able to remain engaged, that it stays exciting for them, and that they know that they're offering to their customers, that they're working with the very best skills possible. So learning new skills is really important. Interestingly enough, it's also one of the largest complaints that we hear back from people were the workforce in the channel, and that is there's not enough opportunity to learn new skills. And again, they're talking about skills at all different levels. So that's where things like extreme and opportunities to learn those skills become important to people across the board, because they see that as a key factor to keeping them fresh in the marketplace. And then the number 1 overall motivator, or thing that people chose to be most important in the workplace, is being treated with respect. Now, this has been the same number 1 for the last several years, and we've done numerous focus groups with workforce, with people, asking them specifically, what do you mean by being treated with respect? What does it look like? What does it sound like? How do you know if you're being treated with respect? So I want to be able to give a little bit of context here, because it is pretty important. Actually, with a lot of service businesses, we happen to use, for example, that metric that gives us some indicator of success called the billable hour. Now, the billable hour, certainly to a group of operational managers that are looking at where things are happening and what kinds of projects are working best, and even in some cases, where people are performing, it becomes an important metric. To people, when we communicate back to people about their performance and what's happening and what's occurring, we oftentimes use that metric alone. And I say this because this was mentioned over and over again in numerous focus groups. And one quote that I just really seared through me that one person mentioned is, they said, I have been on the road and I've been working with customers for the last several weeks almost nonstop. But he said, no one really stops to ask me how it's going. Nobody really stops to ask me, how's your family doing since you've been on the road for the last almost month? Nobody seems to stop and ask me how I'm doing as a person. But the one question I get over and over again is, do you have any more billable hour time available? And they said, I believe I'm being measured like a machine. How many billable hours do I kick out? Now, having said that, we know that billable hours becomes a metric, but how we communicate that with people can leave people with a sense of disrespect for who they are as a person. The other thing that has come up a lot around being treated with respect is just the overall communication process. Are we communicating with each other with respect? Are people allowed to carry out their conflicts in the hallways? You know, is there any kind of standard of performance when it comes to communicating with each other and relating to each other? And even utilizing people's thoughts and ideas. And so, again, we come back to part of this relates to the teamwork and collaboration. Do people have the communication skills to let people know that they respect their ideas, they respect their opinions and views, even if it's not exactly what's going to happen? You know, even if their idea isn't going to be utilized, they still would like to be able to hear a thank you. They'd like to be able to hear, well, tell me why, tell me more about why you think that's important. That kind of communication level, particularly coming from managers, is very crucial. And there are numerous stories over and over again about where people feel respected or where they do not feel respected. So you'll notice, interestingly enough, that when asked the question of what are the most important things for you at work that attract you to an environment, then this is the list of the top 5. Now, I'm going to balance that because we're going to come back and we're going to take a look at why would you change jobs? So it's one thing to be able to say, these are things that are important to me, but then when we get into the workplace, what would cause you today to change jobs? And so I'll ask you to think about this top 5, and we'll see if it matches up exactly with why people would leave work. There are a couple of things we did ask people about, was also their relationship with their manager. Now, they had some choices in this study. One is when asked, tell me about your relationship with your direct manager, it ranged all the way from one end, which is, I don't know who my direct manager is, which, you know, sometimes people have a tendency to chuckle, but a significant number of people will say, I don't know who my direct manager is. It appears that in the world of projects and project management, we have sometimes forgotten to actually realize that people need a coach, or they want a coach. High performers want someone they can go to help them think through, walk through, solve problems, etc. And they want to be able to have a relationship with that. Now, they could answer that all the way to my direct manager is an inspiration and a coach to me on a regular basis. The in-between spot of that would be, I only hear from my manager if I have a problem. So the ranges that people could choose were, I don't even know who it is, I know who my manager is, but I only hear from them when there's a problem. In other words, no news is probably good news, or somebody is actually actively involved with me from a coaching standpoint. When you correlate those responses, the people that responded in those categories, with what is your current situation on your job, ranging from I want out of here, or I'm actively looking for a job, all the way through to I want to stay in this environment as long as possible, here's where we found some significant impacts. So if we look at, first of all, my leader is an inspiration to me, that being the highest score or point, versus I only hear from my leader when there's a problem. Interestingly enough, those people who say that their leader is an inspiration, 96% of them plan to stay on the job as long as possible. So this clearly becomes a strong retention point. And that's why I said earlier, leadership has an impact on people, because 96% is a pretty strong, these are of the respondents, the people that said, I want to stay on this job just as long as possible. As long as there's a company here, as long as there's a job for me here, I love what I'm doing. When those people that said, I only hear from my manager when there's a problem, 60% of them said they plan to stay on the job as long as possible. So the leadership relationship can increase the retention here by at least 36 points. When I say this has even gone up, in previous studies, we also saw a high correlation here between the leadership relationship and the retention relationship, but it was more at about 85%. So where my leader is an inspiration to me, 85% of the people said they plan to stay in the job as long as possible, and about 60% of them said, if only when my leader, only when I hear my leader say there's a problem or talk about a problem. So clearly this has become an increase of focus. And it is kind of interesting to have dialogues with people and think about things about what are the expectations of leaders, how do leaders communicate, do you have standards of performance for leaders, do leaders see themselves as having the role of coaching and ongoing development of people, are they staying close to people in terms of what some people might need in terms of their coaching and development, or are we simply looking at numbers in the project? So this is one area that we do have some control of. Oftentimes when people assume that it's compensation alone that is in fact driving retention, we feel a little bit out of control because we may not always have the amount of money that someone down the street has to be able to try to retain talent. But I think findings like this indicate that we do have some control if leadership is staying connected to people and being able to ensure the fact that they have that relationship and it's ongoing. Now let's take a look at asking the question of reasons for changing jobs. If you remember, we went through the top 5, and this is when people are asked. This is one way of trying to kind of check the data. When people were asked what's most important to you in the workplace, they answered. We talked about that top 5. But when asked the question of what would cause you to change your jobs today, then I took another top 5. And so reasons for changing jobs, all responders. And this means all age groups, all genders. For the sake of this presentation, I'll make a couple of comments about where it's a little bit different in terms of some of the genders and age. And again, I took a top 5. Now, interestingly enough, in this, when you come to take a top 5, the 3, 4, and 5 were significantly about a 10-point difference from 1 and 2. And when I say that, it's because clearly the top 2 were so important to them in the top 2 that even though I did a top 5, there definitely was a break and it wasn't as natural of a flow. But number 5, lack of opportunity for new skills. So one of the reasons people will change jobs is they just feel they're getting stale. They're not having an opportunity to learn, whether it's the newest technology or how the technology works, or whether it's about sales skills or marketing skills, or whether it's about leadership skills if they're in a leadership role. And people will change jobs if they perceive that somebody else can provide them that. And that they will be able to stay up to date. Because I believe that in the technology world, different in some other industries, people understand that in their organizations, they're not going to grow in their career by climbing some kind of corporate ladder. I mean, they're not looking necessarily all for title, but they are looking for having a cross-section of skills that makes them more employable, gives them more opportunities for fun and interesting projects and challenges. And so it's the skill attainment that they latch onto as opposed to room within the organizational chart to climb. And that's actually pretty good because, when we talk about smaller organizations doing a lot of things, there isn't always room for top management. There's not room for layers of management. And if we think that that is the only way that we can help people to bolster their career or help them to feel like their career is growing, then we're going to have a problem. And so from this standpoint, opportunity for new skills, number 5. The number 4 reason that people said that they would change jobs is compensation. Now, interestingly enough, they didn't say that going in, but they said that if they were going to change jobs. Now, having walked through, again, some focus groups with that, people continue to say that even if it was higher compensation someplace else and I didn't see skills development, or I didn't have managers or see management people that I think will coach me and help guide me, or if I believe that there's not necessarily positive teamwork, then compensation falls down in the ranks. But they did say that higher compensation would be one of the factors that they would switch jobs and at least take the risk of finding these other components within a new organization. The third highest one was poor work-life balance. It's interesting that that did not come up on the top 5 in terms of ask the question of what's most important to you. It does come up when people are asked about changing jobs today. And again, to put some context behind that, in the focus group and in dialogues with people, there seems to be kind of an interesting blend here. Work-life balance, we hear, I've done a lot of age group study, generational studies within workplaces, and I hear two sides of the fence here. One is I hear people of maybe the boomer generation saying, well, the younger generation, all they want to do is be out of here by 5, and if you ask them to do something else, they have to take off for a little league game, or they have to go do something else. On the other side of it, you hear people in the generation X and Y saying that, I'm answering emails all night long. Yes, I may be taking off at 5 for my son's little league game, but I log back in at 7, and I'm answering a variety of different things until 10 o'clock at night. So we've kind of created our own problem here. What we do find, though, in the current work environments is that people are feeling a lot of stress and kind of a poor work-life balance. And some of the ways to manage that would be to be able to put some standards into place. Interesting, at Extreme in the Executive Summit group, we talked about this particular point to quite some extent. And some people said that they were now actually putting standards into place in their workplace that unless it's an emergency, and that would have to be an absolute crucial emergency, that people were not to be emailing past a certain time at night. Unless, of course, they had a global and they had to email. There were these different nuances. But in general, they didn't want people logging on and emailing or logging on and sending questions and triggering people. They wanted them to be able to go home, spend some time with their families, get a good night's sleep, come back at it the next day. But they talked about how difficult that is because so many of us are attached to our technology, and we're so attached to it that we're monitoring it almost 24/7, and that is impacting some of the poor work-life balance. Travel also plays a part in this. And when you think about providing services and et cetera to customers, that some people are doing a fair amount of traveling. And so while they may you see some people initially say, that sounds good, I like the travel, then they get to a certain point in their overall life cycle, whether it's they have young children at home or maybe they're just tired of that amount of travel, that plays into it as well. So work-life balance, I think, is something we have to keep an eye on, but we do that with communication because it varies from employee to employee in terms of what that actually means to them. Now, I mentioned that the reasons for changing jobs in this study, although I took the top 5, there was a 10-point difference between number 3 and number 2, and then number 2 and number 1 were closer together. So there's just an even stronger emphasis that. Number 2 reason for changing jobs is not a shock, not being treated with respect. Nobody's listening to my ideas. I'm talked down to. People just don't seem to really care about me as a person. People aren't really sure. I'm not sure I have any value here except to drive a billable hour. These are the kinds of quotes that we get from people who just feel that they're not being treated with respect. Again, this is a controllable factor. This is a cultural factor that is within our control. And the number 1 reasons why people would change jobs is I don't trust my manager. So again, to all of you out there that are managing people directly, the emphasis comes back again as we correlated the data earlier that showed that so many people, when they have a good relationship with their manager, want to stay on the job and want to remain engaged. It is also the number 1 reason why people will change jobs, is that they simply don't trust their manager. They don't believe their manager has the best interest in heart. Their manager may not tell them the truth. These are some of the kinds of things we heard when we said, well, if you don't trust your manager, what would you hear? Well, I'm not sure that I'm getting the truth from my manager. They're not paying enough attention to what I'm doing if I make a mistake. They're not there to help me walk it through. They're more there to place blame. So these would be the kinds of things that would cause a distrusted manager, and also just a sheer lack of communication. We're all just really, really busy, and what we found by having dialogues and focus groups with people is that when a manager and their employees are not communicating on a regular basis, just one-on-ones, not just about projects and how that's going, but how are you doing, what are some of the things you're aspiring to, what are some of your goals, how can we help you to achieve some of those goals, how is this working, maybe this is something that needs to be changed. When those kinds of conversations are not going on, then there's not a chance to build trust. So people will get to the point where they will actually say, I have very little communication with my manager, or I don't trust my manager to really be concerned about me, as a professional. So those are the reasons for changing jobs. Now, this is a brief overview, obviously. There's a lot of other information that can come a part of this. As you look at this reasons for changing jobs, I just want to make one point that one of the reasons for the higher compensation popped in higher for some of the younger, so the people that under the age of 35, it made it to number 3. And for women, poor work-life balance popped up there into the number 2 spot. And so I don't know that there's enough data for us to draw hard conclusions on that, but it is a trend that we'll continue to look at. Otherwise, most responders had a lot of similarity. If you look at the workers that were under the age of 65 but older than 35, then higher compensation fell down further. So perhaps they've hit a stride there where the compensation, they're budgeted for it, and it seems to be fine. But just some things for us to think about. So what can we do with all of this? I mean, if retaining the right kind of talent and engaging them, having them actively engaged, not looking for other jobs, but actually, doing the kind of work that we bring them in to do, what are some of the things that we can do based on some of this learning? One is we can tap into some of the most talented of young professionals and build mentoring programs. We are seeing less and less, again, of people under the age of 25 entering into this workplace. Where we used to have a lot of mentoring programs across the channel. Partners themselves would have connections with universities. They would have connections. They would go to different university sites and try to recruit people. And that's the way to fill in, if you will, of our talent group. We can fill in our talent group by mentoring and bringing people along the way. Because we also have an aging work group. So that brings us to another one of how are we collaboratively transferring knowledge between generations. So we have people that have been working in technology services firms or building software, in some cases here for 20 to 25 years. They need to learn some new ways, but they also have a lot of knowledge about the workplace and about the market, etc. And far too often that becomes a point of conflict in organizations as opposed to actively trying to transfer knowledge between generations and building mentorships and that sort of thing so that people can make use of what each of the different generations know. That can help to balance it out. Also, individualize the value of work. And what I mean by that is, as a leader, one of the things that people talked about when they felt that they were not respected is they said, I'm not sure anybody really knows that I have any value other than what they can bill for, that I could possibly solve a problem, or that I might know something that might help someone over there. Or I don't even know, sometimes we pull people in and out of projects and they may not see the end result of what's happened. So individualizing the value of work is simply by being able to show people what you do, whether you're in administration and you're in accounts receivable, you're in sales and marketing, you're in active development and customization or implementation, or you're doing some business process consulting, how all of you contribute to a customer's success. That message becomes very, very important in helping people to see that whatever role they're playing in the organization, they too have an impact on the customer success. They too have an impact on the success of the organization. And when we talk to people in dialogue groups and in focus groups, the people that have those sorts of conversations with their managers and feel that they are of value at work, that what they are doing, regardless of their role, is valuable and important, their satisfaction level and their trust with their manager is dramatically higher. So we want to individualize the value that each person brings and how they can help to contribute. Engage, inspire, and develop leaders. Since we know for a fact that leadership has an impact here, it's a controllable factor for us in our organizations. It has to do with more than money. It has to do with more than simply being able to perform a specific skill. It has to do with building that relationship between our employees and ourselves as a manager, and helping them to see the value of work, helping them to grow their skills. We need to be able to develop leaders. A lot of questions come up about, well, what do I communicate? So I bring people in, and if I'm not looking at a project plan, then what are we going to communicate? What do we talk about? And I think that just being able to get to a point of having some improved communication skills along that way, questioning, listening skills, actively being engaged with employees, letting employees know that they are of value and we're there to help them along the way. But that doesn't mean being soft. I just want to clarify here. And equally on the side of, if somebody's not paying attention to what I'm doing, then they're also not helping me when I make mistakes, or I might not even know that I made a mistake until 6 months later when somebody says, well, you really messed up that project, and so we're not going to put you on this other one, or they just simply kind of ignore them in place. So it's not about soft. It's not about being soft on performance. In fact, it's just the opposite. The highest performers in organizations are continually looking for real-time feedback. They're looking for people to tell them this worked, this doesn't work, or are there some other things that we need to do to help you to understand how to perform within this? Maybe there's somebody else in the organization that can assist. These are the kinds of skills that leaders need to have today in order to make some of these other points happen, such as transferring knowledge and helping find mentors for others within the organization. And then ultimately it becomes a cultural issue, since we do know that one of the top reasons that people will leave work is whether they're being treated with respect and they have trust with their managers. And we also know that one of the top motivational factors is being treated with respect and also having a collaborative work environment. Then those become cultural issues. Again, things within our control. We cannot always control the marketplace. We cannot always control what somebody else is paying someone. We can't always control the number of recruiters that contact our people or attempt to sell our people. What we can control is building a culture where we have mutual respect amongst employees, that people feel that their work has value, that they're appreciated, and that we're open and honest with them. And we communicate. We walk the talk. We communicate with them, and we stand by consistently what we say we're going to do. And we have open dialogues that improve problem solving. These are cultures of mutual respect and trust. And clearly this study, as well as numerous others that we've looked at along the way, continue to point to this as a factor. But I think even more so, it's best that it's a factor within our controls, within our control and organization. And as a group of leaders within an organization, we can tackle this. We can build that culture, and we can manage to a culture where this is the expectation, that it's not just by chance, that it's actually the expectation. With that, I am going to see if anybody has any questions, and if there's some questions that we might be able to answer, and I believe, John, you can help me out with this as well.
I certainly will, Bonnie. If anybody would like to ask a question, I have all of your lines currently muted. Simply raise your hand. You go to and we'll open up your lines. But in lieu of that, Bonnie, I want to thank you. I personally gained a lot of information out of the details and the study that you've done. So thank you very much for that. I'm sure that all the other attendees on today's webinar gained an awful lot of insight as well. Is this something that you'll be covering as well at the Executive Summit at Extreme in November?
Yes, John. Christy and I have been discussing this, and people typically still want some more in-depth knowledge. Now, we can even add to the study, and I have added to the study by incorporating soon-to-be graduates from technology schools. So based on the question of how do we attract some young talent and how do we build mentoring programs, we felt the need to go out to some technology schools and begin to ask the questions about what are you looking for in the workplace. So that study is not completed yet, but we're in the process of doing that to see where it matches up. And then also with alumni, so people that have been in the workforce for about 5 years, looking at some of the same questions and saying, you know, what would be your reasons for changing jobs? Did you find what you were looking for? How has your viewpoint changed, if it has, from the time that you were graduating from university and looking to find some jobs? So we're going to expand a little bit of that into what would it mean to build mentoring programs and to actually be able to attract some good young talent into the channel as well.
Interesting. So we'll build on top of that information at Anaheim. That's fantastic, Bonnie. I don't see anybody raising their hands, so I'm assuming all of the questions have been answered. I don't see any typed questions, so I believe that we've covered all the questions and covered all of our bases. But with that, Bonnie, I would love to thank you again. It's always a pleasure hearing you talk about the information that you've learned out into the field through the research that you've done and the insight that you bring to the channel. We really do appreciate that. And again, everybody, if you want to dive a little deeper into all this information as well as tons and tons of other information that executives and leaders often face on a daily basis, make sure that you attend the Executive Summit that's really coordinated with the event in Anaheim, our Extreme CRM event. That event, you can find more information there at our website at extremecrm.com. Tons of information there that you can dig around and dig deeper into it. This year we've really expanded the overall conference itself with 115 separate sessions all along the way. So we're basically doubling down on the value that we bring to the partners through the conference itself. But the Executive Summit is really geared towards those leaders and those executives, and they'll dive deep as a team to really get into the business and the operational sense. So with that, I really do appreciate your attentiveness. Thank you, everybody. If you have any questions or comments or concerns that you would like to bring up, certainly do reach out to myself, any of our team members, and we'll certainly push the question on to others if we need to, answer them directly if we can. But certainly I'm looking forward to seeing everybody in Anaheim as we pull off our 7th yet conference around CRM in conjunction again with the Executive Summit. So thank you everybody very much. Thank you, Bonnie. Really do appreciate it. Lots of great stuff there, and have a great day.
Thanks, John.